morning. It is good to see everybody. And we are in our sixth and final week of our series, Rule of Life. And, you know, that comes from, if you remember, from Benedictine, who kind of is the guy credited with starting monasteries, and he kind of created this kind of way to live called the Rule of Life. And we're using rule not to mean something limiting or like some kind of regulation, although it comes from the same word, but in the sense that the root word for rule is the Latin word regula. And it actually was a trellis. And so if we think of it in terms of something, they would use a trellis to lift plants and vines up off the ground, to support them, to protect them, to create more fruitfulness in them. And that's what rules do for us. That's in this sense, and that's what we're talking about. In the last 5 weeks, we've talked about the rule of joy, the rule of faith, the rule of freedom, the rule of wisdom, and the rule of humility. And we're doing this all through the context of the book of James. James probably has got the best idea for how to live life. It's a very practical book. And so we've been doing that. Today, we're going to look at the rule of patience. The rule of patience. Connor, I'm just a little loud. You can pull me down just a little bit. And that would be great. So I don't bother. It's bothering me. If it's bothering me, it's got to be bothering you. It just seems loud to me. I was in one place one time, and there was a lot of people in it when I traveled and did music, and I had to deal with all the audio and everything. And it always seemed like the people that wanted it loud would always sit in the back, and the ones that didn't would sit in the front. And so one time we got to this little church, and we just got made an announcement. Said, if you think it's too loud, if you'll just move to the back, and if you like it loud, you'll come to the front. I don't want you to have to move today, so we'll do that. When we look at patience, the one definition says this: it is the ability to tolerate delay, trouble, suffering, without getting angry or upset. Patience. Why is it that when we plan these series out, I always get stuck with the one that I have to, probably the one I need. I think God knows I needed this. So if you will tolerate me just having a lot of self-reflection, and I need this message this morning, and it applies to you too. Well, I mean, you're in the room. It's okay. I think about this, and I told somebody before I left to go overseas a couple of weeks ago, I said, I don't know about all this travel I've got to do. And they said, why? I said, because God has a way of always dealing with me. You know this, I talk about it all the time. And when I have a subject that I'm preaching on, I know I'm preaching on it that coming Sunday, God has a way of making me deal with that subject personally through that week. And I don't know why, I keep saying, God, I promise you don't have to do that. I don't need to be a walking illustration. I've never wanted to be Jeremiah or Isaiah or any of those old prophets that he did that to. And so I said, I'm really I'm leaving on this trip in fear and trepidation, because when I get back, I have to preach on patience. Well, sure enough, we get a couple of weeks ago, we had everything planned out right. And Pastor Terry from Newport News and I on Tuesday morning headed up to D.C., up to Dulles, and our flight was supposed to leave at 5:30 that night. And we got there in time to get lunch, and we got the car parked where we had provided parking for us, and we got the show, everything on time. We went through check-in process, smooth as could be. We got to the security line, which was always a little daunting, went through that just like nothing. Got to the gate early, and I was like, this is great. Maybe this will be the one time. We got on the plane. We sat down. We had, and these are all first world problems. It's nothing that anybody really, it's nothing, but when you're flying, so I got on the plane, and there was a room for all my overhead stuff, so I didn't have anything under my feet. It was great, and so got it all up and got sat down, and both of us were sitting, and on this particular flight, we were sitting one in front of the other, because we both want an aisle, and we don't like to share. And so we were And neither one of us had anybody sitting on this. We were in that middle section. There was like 4 seats across there. There was just nobody there. And I'm like, okay. And you start watching everybody getting on a plane and nobody's coming down. I'm like, this is great. And sure enough, they get done. They close the doors and I look back at Terry and neither one of us. There were 2 empty seats next to us. This is for like the 9-hour flight, we got to take. I'm thinking, this is amazing. I even got one of my bags down that had my computer in it and put it under the seat in front of it because I had all this room. I said, this is great. I can stretch out. Good. We sat there, and I'm thinking, okay. I sent my usual text to the group text to all the kids and Annie that I send every time I fly. And I said, I'm on the plane, leaving in, should be, 10 minutes. Turning my phone off and leaving. Love you guys. I'll let you know when I land. I do that every time. And I did that. Got everything. And this is good. And, okay. Yeah, we were so early and it was just so good. I plugged in my little headphones. Started finding stuff like, ooh, I never saw Indiana Jones. I'm going to watch that. I got to, a lot of times I have some old stuff I've already seen. So this is exciting. This is good. And got that on there and leaned back. And it's about 30 minutes into that movie and realized, we haven't moved yet. We should be in the air at this point, I think. And I turned around and looked there. I said, yeah. He says, no, we had. Then the pilot come on and said, well, we've got a sensor that's going over. Having to check it. Then it seemed like a little bit later, something else. Oh, there's a problem with the engine. We're going to have to pull back into the gate so they can check it. Just make sure. It could just be a sensor. I've had them say that about my car before. I know that's never right. We pull back in. And then he says, the mechanic says that we're going to have to all get off the plane so they can work on so if you'll get, and I know well enough when you get off the plane. So I'm hoping for the best. I'm like, okay, maybe this is just simple as getting off the plane because they got to do something. It's not safe for us to be on the plane. Don't want to be on it if they're messing with the engine and fuel and all that stuff. Okay, that's good. Maybe it won't be long. And as we're leaving, coming back into the terminal, there's a nice little man standing there handing out vouchers for free food. And let me tell you something, when they give you free food, it ain't going to be just a minute. They don't give you nothing free unless you're going to be there a while. And I looked at Terry and I went, oh, this isn't good. So we immediately headed to the customer because we realized at this point, there is no way we're going to make our connection in Germany. And we had so many plans for Germany. Oh, I had been online looking at the German restaurants I was going to have breakfast at. We had 3.5 hours. I was going to take the train into Munich and I was so excited. Because German breakfast is like, they're not a meat that they don't love to give you for breakfast. It was like, oh, this is going to be great. Meat and cheese and just nice, heavy breakfast. I was so excited. And I watched as that just shriveled away. It's like, okay. So then we had to reschedule our flight. So now instead of leaving Germany at 10 in the morning, now we're leaving at 2 in the afternoon. Okay. But we hope we'll make that flight. We get back 4 hours later. They bring in a new plane. I made sure of that. Like, did they fix something or is this a new plane? Oh, it's a new plane. It's a different plane. Okay. We got on. Same people were not there. We had the same space. Everything was still good. Great flight. We got there. Still had time to eat in the airport. I'm looking for something decent. Now we're eating lunch. So I'm looking for a decent meal because you know the way I eat. I can't just grab McDonald's or a sandwich. I'm like, we need something. I need some meat and vegetables. And there was this place where you had to leave the airport, which meant even more delay because you had to go through passport control. You had to do all this. You had to actually leave all the security, which means you got to check back in through all of that. I said, it'll be worth it. I found a place, Terry. Look, there's a place outside, and it was called Smoky Joe's. Some of you are hungry right now. I said, Smoky Joe's. Oh, I can't even imagine. This is going to be some kind of German barbecue or something. This is going to be good. This is going to be some meat I can eat. We get out the door, out in Munich. It's like this big outdoor area outside the airport. Like it was and most time, and they were setting up because they were getting ready for like their kind of winter fest type kind of, it was going to look like a village. And you walked out there, and I saw Smoky Joe's. Smoky Joe's, by the way, if you're ever in Munich Airport, is an Airstream trailer. No seats or anything, no tables. It's just an Airstream trailer that sells basically German hot dogs. I said, well, I like a hot dog, but I'm not sure I can do that. And then I said, wait. I'm looking. By then I pulled up, I had a map of the airport. I said, there's a place just right over there called Surf and Turf. If I can't find some meat at Surf and Turf. In Germany, apparently, Surf and Turf means hamburgers and sushi. I had a salad. Wonderful salad. Nice big salad. It was great. So all plans are falling apart. We get there, and we get there fine. We get there, we see our friend Johnny, he's there to pick us up. We're so excited. Terry's telling me last time I was here, there's a great place it's a really nice place for here. And they got like steaks, like big steaks. And I'm like, all right, Terry, yeah, I'm on a mission trip. I don't know. He goes, no, you don't understand. He said, here, it's like the biggest steak. They have this like tomahawk steak. You know, I see that on cooking shows. I couldn't tell you how to make it, but it looks like a giant lollipop, but it's all meat. Huge steak. He said it cost $40-something. I said, Terry, I can't do $40 for it. He goes, no, not American. 40 Romanian. And I real quick did the conversion. Wait, it's almost 5 to 1. So $8. He said, yeah. I said, okay, we can do that. So I'm all excited about this restaurant. So we're getting there and we're talking to Johnny and I'm waiting. And that little carousel keeps coming around. At some point, they shut the door. I looked at Terry and I said, you think there's more luggage coming? He just looked at me and said, they shut the door. I said, I know they shut the door, but do you think any more luggage is coming? He said, they shut the door. I think that's universal for we're done. And there was no luggage for us. Somehow on the change of flights, it all stayed in Germany. So then we had to go to the office and wait. And then we go into an office. There are no non-smoking offices, by the way, in Romania. That was fun. They also believe in any kind of air circulation of any type. And so we stood in this relatively hot, smoky office and waited for them to look up stuff and then tell us, well, your bags are in Germany. And we kind of figured that out. I'm glad they weren't in D.C. They'll be here on the last flight tonight. And I'm thinking, okay, we're an hour and a half from the airport. Maybe we can come back. We didn't have anything scheduled till the next day. She said, but we close. The last flight's at 10:30, and this office closes at 9. So we can't get our bags tonight even if we wanted to. Okay, well, we'll send them to you. Next day, we get a notice that the courier has our bags. That's all we know. We don't know if the courier is a little nice man in an ox cart or we had no idea. We just knew the courier had our bags. The bags got to us exactly an hour before we were supposed to leave to go to where I had to preach that night. The good news is my stuff got there in plenty of time. I didn't need it that morning. It was great. We survived. I got there. Everything was great. And I'm just thinking, this is because I'm preaching on patience when I get home. This is God's way of trying to say, really, patience? You want patience? You need patience? Let me help you out with that. Now, here's the good news when we talk about patience. Paul, before we even get to the book of James, Paul tells us that patience is actually a result of the Holy Spirit in our lives. Galatians 5:22 says, but the Holy Spirit produces this kind of fruit in our lives. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. So what that tells me is that we know we need patience. But that it's not something we have to come up with, or we don't have to be, that it is something God gives us as a production of the Holy Spirit in our lives. Now, James, let's get back to James. That's what we're focused on. And the theme of James, if you haven't caught this over the last few weeks, is basically he's trying to tell us about genuine faith. What genuine faith is, what it means to believe. And that a genuine faith is a faith that will produce a genuine life. And that means if you have been transformed by the life of Jesus in you, then it should show up in your thoughts. It should show up in your attitudes and your actions. It should show up in your spending. It should show up in your speech. It should show up in your relationships. And in the last chapter of James, he kind of takes on this idea of patience. And in keeping with kind of his whole theme of his letter, he kind of tells us how we need that rule of patience in our life if we're going to have faith. Let's pick it up. James 5 and verse 7 says this. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. I love that boy. Otherwise, you will be condemned, he says. And I love the older translations that I kind of remember as a kid. Let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. In other words, just yes or no, it's that simple. Let's just, for the next few minutes, I want to look at some lessons in patience that James gives us. Just look at this passage. Here's the first one. We need to have an attitude of patience. An attitude of patience. That first verse that we read in verse 7 says, be patient until the Lord's coming. And then he gives us an example, just in case you're not sure. And I love James. He's so practical. He says, look at the farmer. Consider the farmer. How he waits for the land to yield a crop. And he's waiting for the rain. Now, it's interesting here that all the times we've talked about James so far, we seem to see him as a person of action. Do you remember a few weeks ago, faith without works is dead? I mean, he said, just like you can't live without breathing, your faith without works doesn't mean anything. He's a person of action. But this right here, when he talks about patience, he is not talking about it. He says patience is about resting. It's about waiting. It's about being like a farmer who's waiting on the rain. It's out of your control. There's nothing you can do about it. It's incredibly necessary. You need it, but you've just got to wait. He's basically saying patience is what you are, not what you do. And it's kind of complete opposite of all his other stuff he's saying. He gets to this point and says this, and it's kind of like he's bringing some balance to everything else he's taught. He's also bringing balance. Remember who he's writing to, the Jews that were spread all over. And it was a world that was filled with uneasiness, with violence, with wars, with rumors of wars. Kind of like today. And he reminds us that God cannot be forced or rushed. You've just got to wait. Now he brings up, in this translation it says that the autumn and fall or spring, autumn and spring rains. Some say early and later rains. The early rain is a reference, especially in that area where James was talking to there in the Middle East. The early rain was the rain that would come and actually germinate the seed. So it was you had to wait for that rain to be able to plant. In other words, that was the first rain. You couldn't, if you planted before that rain, it messed up everything. You had to wait for it. So you're wanting to plant, you know it's time to plant, and you're having to wait on that rain. And then the later rain was important because it actually helped the grain to mature. It was what kept the crop from failing. It helped grow the rain. It brought it, those kind of things. And this is not, keep in mind, this is not in an era where they could just bring out some and irrigate the crops. Bring the water from somewhere else. No, they had to wait on the rain. The farmer could never make the rain come. He had to be patient and trust God to send it at the right time. So when James here says, be patient, he is describing an attitude that we need to have. An attitude that can endure delay, that can bear with suffering, that will not give in or quit or give up. Now, even though it is an attitude and it is not necessarily active, it's talking about an attitude of rest, it does require an active faith. You can't take away from, James wasn't contradicting himself. We still have to have that act. But what James was saying is, in this particular area, your response, your action is to rest. Your action is to rest and trust God. That is your response. Your response to the trials of life. So James is saying this: when you were mistreated, somebody does you wrong, be patient. Trust God. When things don't go your way, they don't go like they were supposed to, be patient. When you don't see the results that you want to see in your life or your family or your circumstances, be patient. And the challenge here is be patient for, okay, and this is my question a lot, you know. And he'll say to me, well, I don't know, we just got to be patient. I'm like, okay, how long? How long do you think it's going to be? Like, I want to be patient. Lord, help my impatience. Is it just until you're tired of waiting? And if it is, what are we waiting for? You know, well, he gives us that answer because he says, be patient until the Lord returns. Now, if we're not careful, that can not be great news. I mean, he's basically saying, look, life could be good, bad. You're going to have ebbs and flows. You're going to have ups and downs. But you're not being patient until life gets better. That's not what you're waiting on. You're waiting for the Lord to return. You're waiting for Jesus to come back. So be patient, he says, till the Lord comes back. But here's the second lesson. The first one is an attitude of patience. Here's the second, action of patience. This is James, after all. So the very next verse, verse 8, he says this. He talks about the farmer, and he says, you too, be patient and stand firm. Be patient and stand firm. He uses that expression. Now, the word patient is a verb in the Greek that implies rest, but the expression stand firm, that the tense of that verb is it's a specific act that has urgency attached to it. So he says, be patient, but do it urgently. Stand firm. Being patient is a specific attitude. Standing firm is a specific action. And it carries in its definition in the Greek the idea of strengthening or making stable, standing. That's the stand part. Stand firm. And literally, best translated, means to set your heart towards with intentionality. It's actively setting your heart in a position that says, I will not quit. I will not give up. Rest, trust God, and stand firm. Don't give up. Because the reality is, in the patience, in the waiting, you might experience more failure than you do success. It doesn't say be patient and everything will be fine and you're going to be happy. That's not the promise here. He says, be patient until God returns. Stand firm. Be patient and stand firm. I heard a story this week about this boy. And this family, this boy, when he was 7 years old. 7 years old. His family, it was really kind of a legal technicality, but those still are legal. They got kicked out of their house. They were homeless. And at age 7, he had to find jobs and work to support the family. At age 9, you would think, okay, they got out, he's working, it's good. At age 9, his mother died. He starts to get into life. He doesn't let that set him back. He keeps going. And by the time he's 22, he's got a job as a store clerk. And he gets fired, gets laid off. They said, we just don't need you. And then he decided, you know what, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to go to law school. I want to study that. And he goes, but because of his education, because of the lack of his education early on, the law schools look at him and say, no, you don't have the prerequisites. You don't have enough education to attend law school. So at 23, he decided, I'm just going to have to find something else. He went into debt to be a partner in the store. He figured, I'll not get fired again. I'll be a partner. But he went into debt just to be able to have the money to be a partner in this store. 3 years later, at 26, his business partner died and left him with the entire debt for the whole business. Took him years to repay it. A couple of years later, he had been seeing this girl for about 4 years. Things were looking great. Things were moving that direction. He said, I'm not quitting. I'm not giving up. I'm going to keep moving forward with life. So after 4 years of kind of dating and being together, he finally asked the question, I want to marry you. And she said no. You had to see that coming, right? I mean, by the way, I'm not starting to say, if you think this story's going to get better, okay. Fast forward, now he's 41. He did find someone that would say yes. They actually have children. And at 41, they lost their 4-year-old son. I was reading this, and at this point, I think I wanted to quit for him. I'm like, dude, just give up. I mean, this poor guy, but this guy lost his son. 4 years later, he decides, I'm going to run for Senate. Why not? That's just a stellar life so far. Might as well, run for Senate. Of course, he lost. 2 years later, he gets connected with a guy and actually runs for vice president. Because why not? And of course, he lost. 2 years later, he decides, maybe the timing wasn't right. I can do it now. He runs for Senate again. And this time, he loses. But 2 years later, Abraham Lincoln became the President of the United States. Aren't you glad he didn't give up? Could you imagine? I mean, I look at our country now, but could you imagine what it would have looked like had he not been there and been the man of integrity and character that he was? And then it makes me wonder, how many lives could you impact if you chose an attitude of patience? And not just patience, but be patient and stand firm. And don't quit. Don't give up. Trust God for as long as it takes. So stand firm. Don't let the struggles of life steal your patience. Don't let the trials erode your trust in God. Stand firm. Keep getting up. Keep coming back. Don't give up. And you will see results. James is basically saying this. He's saying God is faithful to his word. Be patient and stand firm. You've got to have that attitude. You've got to have that action. But there's more to that verse, because he says, be patient and stand firm. And here's the third lesson. He tells us the allure of patience. It took me a long time to find an A word that really meant incentive. But that's what that word means. And the allure, the incentive, the stimulus, the catalyst, the thing, the reason to hang in there. Be patient and stand firm, verse 8 says, because the Lord's coming is near. The Lord's coming is near. I feel like if you haven't been paying attention and doing what Jesus actually told us to do, and pay attention to the signs, pay attention to the things around us and what's happening in the world, at least maybe every week I need to just jog your brain a little bit and say, Maranatha. Come soon, Lord. And the reality is he is coming soon. He is coming soon. We will not have to wait forever. It might feel like it, but he is coming soon. Now here's the catch with that. When we read in these first century believers, they were convinced he was coming soon. They had this sense of expectancy that the Lord could come and could come any minute, and he would be here during their lifetime. The problem with that is when we look back historically, if we're not careful, we can say, well, I guess they were wrong about that. They must have missed something. And if we're not careful, then we can apply it to us and go, well, yeah, it looks like it could be any minute. But they thought that thousands of years ago. So why should we do that? I think there is a reason that the Lord did not give us the date of his return. Contrary to the dude that wrote 88 Reasons that he was coming in 1988. That did not age well. Nor any of the other myriad of books where somebody said, this is when he's coming back. And I always say, if you ever go somewhere and a man wants to get up and tell you, I'm going to tell you, come to the sermon tonight, I'm going to tell you when Jesus is coming back, just run. But there's a reason he didn't give us the date of his return, and I think it's because he wants us to live with that eager expectation of his return. He wants us to live and maintain that sense of urgency as we follow him, as we share the good news of his grace with other people. We should live as if it could be any moment. The reality is, it could be any moment. The more we see and hear on the news, the more the world events are happening, the more reason we have to believe that the coming of Jesus is very near indeed. And it makes me then ask this question. If you knew that Jesus was coming back next Sunday, well, for one, you probably wouldn't have to cook whatever you plan to cook. I mean, that's... But other than that, how else would you change this coming week? What would you do different this week? If you knew for certain he was coming back on Sunday. I'll never forget hearing this story, and I'll repeat it as true. I have no reason to doubt its veracity, but the famous evangelist and eventually pastor, I guess at some point, I don't know if he ever pastored his church in Chicago, but D.L. Moody founded the Moody Bible Institute and all of that goes with it. He was asked one day, somebody asked him, and they said, if you knew Jesus was coming back tomorrow, what would you do different today? And without hesitation, he said nothing. Because that's how he lived his life. He lived his life with the urgency of believing that he could come back any minute. So why don't we do that? Why don't we live with that same urgency? Living with a sense that the Lord could return at any time should stimulate urgency in us, but also patience. I'm looking at what James is basically saying here. He's saying, be patient, stand firm, because his return is soon. And I'm like, okay, what's his imminent return? And the fact that it could be any minute, how does that help our patience? Because if we've got this strong desire for justice, be patient. God is bringing justice, and his return is soon. Be patient with your temper. If God's coming any minute, that's not the moment you want him to come back in. So be patient. It should change your behavior. Be patient with people. Be like him. And Lord knows he is patient with us. The Bible tells us that he is not, I have it memorized in the King James, he is not lack concerning his promise to us. But he is faithful and he is long-suffering, which is what the word patient actually is best transcribed into. To suffer long. He is patient with us. But Jesus is coming back. And when Jesus comes, it won't be this time as a meek, mild little infant in a manger. It will be as a warrior and a judge. He has set the time. God has set the time for his return. And he knows exactly when it is. And that should help you to not be impatient. Trust him. Lean into him. So in those moments when it seems like those that are unrighteous, that are wicked, that aren't living right, that are a bunch of heathens, seem to get their way, and justice seems unattainable, don't worry or grow impatient, because Jesus is coming back. When disease steals the life out of your loved ones and robs them of the best part of their years, don't lose heart. Don't give up. Be patient, because Jesus is coming back. When it seems like brokenness has filled the entire world with pain and suffering, and it seems like too much to even bear. I don't know about you, but in the last couple of weeks, I was kind of grateful that I was somewhere this past week where there was no TV, there was no nothing, a little remote village we were staying in, and I didn't even look at my phone that much, and it was so refreshing. Because even though I'm here and I can see it, there's times I want to turn the news off. It keeps getting worse and worse. And there's points where I think of it, I look at it like, God, how long can this go on? When you get to that place, don't give up. Jesus is coming back. He's coming, and he's coming soon. This is why James can say that in verse 8. Be patient, stand firm. The Lord's coming is near. But this leads us to our next lesson, because James also deals with a couple of ways and a couple of areas that if we're not careful, we can be tempted to, instead of being patient and trusting God, we can try to kind of work around it ourselves. That's lesson 4, the avoidance of patience. There's a couple of scriptures in this passage we read, and they're not even right together. And if you're not careful, you almost think James just kind of jumped ship for a minute and he came back. But they are very related to patience. The first is verse 9. He says, stand firm. In verse 8, be patient, stand firm. The Lord's coming is near. Verse 9, don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. I'm thinking, where did that come from? But here's what James is doing. He equates impatience, or the lack of patience, or trying to avoid patience, with judging one another. He says, if you're careful and you are not patient like you should be, you know what happens? You tend to judge other people. And I read that and I'm thinking, really? I don't know if I do that. And then I picture myself in a car anywhere in Charlottesville. Especially the last week or so. Has anybody been in Charlottesville? I mean, what happened? I feel like there's a ball game every day, maybe. It feels like that kind of traffic every day. It's like, for some reason, it's got exponentially worse. Could be I'm preaching on patience and God's trying to teach me a lesson. Because what I discovered was, when I am impatient, especially in traffic, I tend to judge other people really badly. I mean, I judge their driving. I complain about their driving. I complain about, sometimes not their driving. Sometimes I judge their mental acuity. I judge their ability to be able to actually think and have a thought that's even rational. And I do this judging sometimes to myself, sometimes out loud. Never with the windows down, thank goodness. I try to make sure I keep it at least in the car. But I read what James said, and it dawned on me that when I judge somebody, when I grumble and complain about somebody else because of my lack of patience, what I'm doing is making a value judgment. I'm judging them. I'm evaluating them. They're either stupid, or as my kids know, they're stupid, which is different than stupid. Stupid means you're not very smart. Stupid, that's a whole nother thing. Or they're an idiot. There's lots of those in Charlottesville. There's plenty in Augusta County too. I just don't seem to I don't drive behind them as much over there for some reason. Or the judgment is this simple. Maybe I don't judge their actual intelligence, I just judge their ability to have ever looked at a driver's manual. Ever. And basically I'm saying, well, I'm a better driver. Or, and this gets worse if I'm honest, my time is more valuable than theirs. And they are keeping me. If that idiot would have just looked up for 2 seconds, I could have gotten through this light and not been stuck. And now I'm going to get the next 3. And it's going to take me an extra 45 seconds to get to Sam's. And here's the reality. That kind of judging and valuing others, it creeps into not just behind the wheel. It creeps into our relationships. It creates how we treat one another. If I'm impatient with somebody, I'm making a value judgment about their weaknesses or my strengths, or how my strengths are better than their weaknesses. And my impatience leads me to grumble and complain. It basically, impatience, James is telling us, reveals a judgmental, grumbling spirit that ends up usually in complaining about the other person. And so he warns us. He says, don't judge so you won't be judged. And then he kind of lets us know, remember what I just said a minute ago? The judge, remember, that's how he's coming back. The judge is standing at the door, he says. It's just another way of saying Jesus is coming soon. The judge is standing at the door, he says. Now, where would James get this notion? Maybe it's when his half-brother Jesus was preaching, in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7, verse 1, do not judge or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. When you look at the speck and the sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye. He's saying, would you do that? Why? Why would you do that? Why would you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye when you got a whole 2x4 sticking out of yours? What that tells me is every time I call the person in front of me an idiot because they don't know how to drive. Well, you fill in that blank. But basically, when we feel impatient with someone, what we've got to do, I think the remedy for this is to focus not on the other person's weakness, but on their obvious strengths. So when I'm being impatient with Annie, let me just make it real personal. I'm being impatient with Annie, and I'm waiting on her. And she's next door. And she's been next door, and she told me an hour ago, I'm getting ready to come home. And generally it involves something that's generally I'm on the way home so we can eat. There's generally always that part. My impatience tends to revolve around that. But it can be other things, but most of the time it's that. And I'm like, she said she would be. Instead of focusing on, she said and she was coming and she's still over there. What I've got to learn to do is not focus on the perceived weakness of her saying one thing and it being something different. I've got to focus on, you know what though? Annie is incredibly discerning. She is very empathetic and compassionate. And there's probably somebody she's ministering to, or she would have come over. There's probably a parent with an issue she's having to talk with, and a child that she cares about. And here's the tough part. Maybe more than she cares about eating dinner with me. And I've got to focus on those strengths of the other person. So when I get behind that entitled, spoiled brat that's driving his daddy's Mercedes, my Holy Spirit's like to filter all the things I was thinking there today. I have to stop and think, okay, God, you have a plan for him just like you do me. And I don't know what the state is. I don't know where he is. I don't know what he's doing. I'm not sure what's happening. Annie used to do this without even realizing it. When I would get behind somebody in traffic, this is several years ago when my grandmother, who just passed away this year at 100, when she was still very young, youthful in her late 80s, and was still driving. She drove, she still drove, still had a license, but she drove a little different than a lot of people. And so anytime I would start getting impatient in traffic, this was Annie's way of doing exactly what I described, but I didn't have the verbiage to say it that way. I'm not sure she did either, but this is all Annie would say to me. I'm going, what in the world? Come on. Really? I mean, I get it. You don't want to drive 10 miles over like I do, but at least don't drive 5 miles under. Can you, whatever? And Annie would go, you know, that could be your Nana. And every time she would say that, I would go, oh. Because suddenly I stopped valuing and judging them as some nameless, faceless idiot, slow old person. That's rich, me calling somebody old. Okay, but suddenly I pictured somebody like me driving behind my Nana, like I was doing to them. And suddenly I was able to allow the Holy Spirit to produce some patience in my life, because I wasn't judging them. I wasn't doing it. And James saying that's the result. That's what happens. It will help us if we can do that, if we can see others that way. But then James, if we jump from verse 9, jump down to verse 12, it's another one of those little inserts that he throws in. It's like, what does that have to do with patience? But it really is talking about patience. He says this in verse 12. Above all, don't swear by heaven or by earth, by anything else. All you need to do is say a simple yes or no. Otherwise, you'll be condemned. See, here's the reality. Sometimes, instead of being patient with God's plan, his timing, trusting him in his lives, we can be tempted to use leverage to try to make it happen without it. And this is where we lose patience. And this is what he's talking about here, because oaths and swearing an oath and a curse was a way of sort of getting it done, making it happen. I read this story this week and it jumped out at me because it was about Thomas Jefferson. That makes it holy. At least in this county. Maybe not as many people used to, but I think still a lot do worship him. But he had worked out a way, because he had all these ways of doing stuff. And Jefferson actually had rules of life. He had his own rules of life, like the monks had. He kind of formulated it, probably read about it somewhere in France. That's where he got messed up with a lot of stuff. But he included this in his rules of life, which outlined basically how adults should live, should function. He dealt with patience. And he said this. This is a quote. When angry, count to 10 before you speak. That's not bad. I've heard Andy tell you that on many occasions. When angry, count to 10 before you speak. If very angry, count to 100. That's Jefferson's, wisdom there. Now here's what I love, and I read this week. About 75 years later, this author named Mark Twain, his pen name, Samuel Clemens, the author. He came along, he had seen what Jefferson had wrote, and he revised it slightly. This was Twain's revision of Jefferson's rule of life. He said, when angry, count to 4. When very angry, swear. That was Twain's revision. Now, I think he meant something different than James was talking about when he said don't swear an oath. Although, the language might be different, but it's basically the same thing. What James is saying is using leverage to get your own way. Because when he says swear an oath, those kind of oaths that they would swear at that time, the full oath always contained some kind of almost self-curse. It would sound something like this. I will do this, and towards the end it would say, and may God kill me if I don't do this. It was a way of putting on yourself, in other words, I'm going to get this done. And may God kill me. So I'll swear by heaven or by earth, by anything. He says, don't take an oath in that sense of, I'm going to get it, because what you're doing is, ultimately, you're not trusting God to deal with it. You're saying, I'm going to get it done even if it kills me. And And so what James is saying is, no, that's impatience. That is not patience. That is not the fruit of the Spirit. He says, let your integrity do your talking. Trust in God. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. You don't need anything but yes and no. Let your word convince and persuade. Don't force your will into a situation. Be patient and surrender yourself to God's will. Because this idea of, I'm going to get it done even if it kills me, that whole idea is saying, I'm going to do it. And it's a lack of surrender. And what James is trying to say is, that is opposite of being patient. That's opposite of the farmer that waits on the rain. So we need an attitude of patience. We need the action of patience. We need to understand the allure of patience, that Jesus is coming back. And we need to beware of the avoidance of patience, of not avoiding those kind of things. But then James wraps up this passage by giving us some archetypes of patience. I was so proud of finding that A word, and I told Annie, and she just looked at me like, I said, archetypes, She went, no. I said, well, examples, right? They're just like examples. They're the model, the perfect model of that. And as Annie can only say, then why didn't you just say that? I worked very hard on making them all start with A. Here's what James says in verse 10. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take, or here we could just say consider, the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Now, the prophets are given as examples here as the model of patience and suffering. The prophets of old, as James refers to them, were often harassed and persecuted and even executed, martyred, for speaking the truth about God and man. They put themselves in God's hands. Just as a few examples, you've heard me talk about Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 11, we read that Jeremiah was hunted down by the men of his own hometown. Ezekiel, in chapter 4, we see him suffering extreme bereavement. We know about Daniel and the 3 Hebrew boys. They were exiled to a whole other country and got thrown in furnaces and lions' dens. I mean, their story is epic as what they suffered. Hosea, if you ever read the book of Hosea, Hosea is set up at the very beginning to have a completely failed marriage with an unfaithful spouse, and God tells him this is the plan. The breakdown of your marriage, he says, is inevitable and unavoidable, and it's intentional. Now, I think I'd be prepared to be thrown in a lion's den than to have God speak to me and say, I found the one for you. She's right there. She's a prostitute, and she's going to be unfaithful. She's going to have children. You're going to have 3 children, and you're not going to be sure if they're yours. Be well. I might say, is the lion's den available? I think I'd choose that option. The Proverbs say that it's better to live with a constant dripping. You know the word for that? Chinese water torture. That's what that is. Proverbs says it's better to live with that than with a contentious woman. So give me the lions. That's Hosea. These are the prophets. This is what they went through. They put themselves in God's hands. They were patient, even enduring suffering and punishment, all for what he called them to do, to speak his word. And what James is implying here is that they should keep speaking. The Jews he's talking to, he's saying, keep speaking the word of God. Keep speaking in the name of the Lord. Keep speaking truth and love. Keep sharing the good news about Jesus. And when opposition comes, look to the prophets as your model. Look to the prophets as your examples. They did it with patience. They went through it with patience. And then in verse 11, he continues that a little bit, and he says, as you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard about Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Now, Job is probably the best example we have of patience. I can't think of it. Matter of fact, I can hear that expression in my head. He had the patience of Job. Some of you might have used that expression, didn't even know what it meant. He's the best example of how God rewards those who are patiently enduring suffering for his sake. When you get to the end of the book, and I'd encourage you to read, in literary terms, the book of Job is an epic. That's the genre of Job. And I read that because the arc is incredible. Not Noah arc, the arc of the story. You see the incredible suffering he went through. You see even his friends bring suffering. When I read about Job's friends, it makes me want to say, is there a lion's den available? Because I mean, as my dad would say, with friends like that, who needs an enema? Yeah, I didn't pronounce that wrong. You heard me right. Some of you are like, the pastor just said enema in church. Oh, yes. Actually, I want to say that came from David Willits, probably. We can ask Amy next week about that. But Job has these friends that are like worse than the problems he's having. And then God restores him at the end of the story. God restores him in abundance. And James is kind of saying, look at this. Here's the prime example. Consider the prophets, but then look at Job, how he persevered, how he went through great suffering. He lost everything, all his possessions, his house, his lands, his everything, his source of income. Lost all of his children. He had to suffer through it. Matter of fact, he lost everything. And this is not lost on me. I feel like today I'm not trying to just beat up on wives, but it is not lost on me that God took everything from Job but his wife. You take that wherever you want. I mean, it's like he went through great suffering. And even she was trying to get him to say, hey, just give up, curse God and die. But he sticks with it. He suffers through it. See, the word patience here, when he says this in verse 11, and everywhere else that is in this passage where it uses the word patience, is the Greek word, I'm not going to try to pronounce it. I am going to try to pronounce it. I said I wasn't. I'm going to sit here trying to do it. Macrothemia. Something like that. And it means to suffer long. Long suffering. You see it in your older translations. It'll say long suffering instead of using the word patience. It means to do that. It's talking about that attitude. It's the character trait that enables us to get through affliction, to be patient, to suffer long. But James here in verse 11 adds another character trait that's very similar, but not the same word. He uses the word that's translated perseverance in this translation, or steadfastness. And it's the word hypomino. And it means that idea of endurance. And here's the thing. I heard it said this week, I like this, that patience and endurance or perseverance are basically two sides of the same coin. They function together. You need one to get through the other. It requires patience to have endurance. They are not the same thing, but they go together. That idea of persevering and putting up with suffering, even if it is for a long time of suffering, you kind of need those two together. And here's the thing. In this passage, in verse 11, James has managed right here, almost at the end of his letter, to kind of loop back to chapter 1. Do you remember chapter 1? It's been a while. It's been 6 weeks. Chapter 1, verse 2. Consider it joy. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Is it not behind me? Yeah, there it is. Perseverance. Now here's the thing. I did what you did. I looked at those and went, perseverance, patience. Well, they're not exactly the same thing, and yet they go together. He says the testing of your faith produces hypomino, perseverance. And then he says, let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. And then at the end of his book, he refers back to this same word, perseverance. This is what you need. So it's almost like you get to the end and so basically, when you consider your examples, the prophets and Job and his perseverance, consider it joy. And I love how he ends this verse, because he says, consider Job, his perseverance, that he made it and he lasted, and then he makes this statement at the end. And he says, the Lord is full of compassion and mercy. And in this moment, he's actually quoting a couple of different Psalms that use almost the exact same verbiage. Psalm 103 and 8. The Lord is compassionate and merciful, slow to get angry, or patient, long-suffering, and filled with unfailing love. Psalm 86:15. But you, O Lord, are a God of compassion and mercy, slow to get angry, or patient, and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. See, if we're not careful, we can think and mistakenly think that because we're suffering, God is not compassionate or merciful. But as we talked about in week 1, when he says, consider joy when you face those trials and what those trials mean, that the purpose God has in your life above all others is that you be transformed into his image, that you would look like him, that he would see his reflection in you. And that is a reward that doesn't end in death, but continues for all eternity. That is his mercy on display. That is his compassion, James is saying. That is compassion and mercy. Perseverance only comes through trials and tribulations and the building of your faith and the endurance that produces Christ-like character, that makes you look more and more like him, makes you more and more in his image. So James says, be patient in your afflictions. God is in control. He has got your best interest in heart. God is patient. He is compassionate. He is merciful. So what does that look like? Well, here's a last example that James doesn't use, but I think is a great example of how to be patient and trust God and lean into his mercy and his compassion. We studied this a while back, a series. We talked about the book of Lamentations. And it's a short book written by the prophet Jeremiah. And the title of the book tells you what it's about. It is a book of lament, of complaint, of saying things are terrible, things are bad. There are some psalms that are lament psalms. We probably will not ever open the service with those psalms. If you notice or not, we don't start with Psalm 1 and go all the way through. We jump around. I skip the lament psalms. I don't think it's very encouraging to open the service with a psalm of David that says, things are horrible, they're terrible, I want to quit, I want to go home. God, take me home now. Let's worship. We're probably not going to do those. We're probably going to stick to the psalms that are more coronation psalms, ascension psalms, psalms that lead us, that encourage us to worship God. But this is a whole book of lament. And it was written during this time of the destruction of Jerusalem around 586 BC. Judah had been warned and warned about not keeping God first in their lives, and now God brings Nebuchadnezzar to come and take over, and his armies lay siege for months. They breach the walls, they keep them off, and they basically are just starving and them to death. They have no food or water. They eventually break in and tear down the temple and everything. But during the siege, in the first few years, first few days of the siege, there was no water or food. There are stories during this time, if you go back and read the Chronicles and the Kings and the places where it talks about this siege, you see that it was so bad. And I can't wrap my head around this really. You know, especially I feel like there's some older, let me just do a poll here, just to get some idea. This is not, I need, raise your hand if you're old, but just for context. How many of you in here had a direct, either parent or somebody like you're that close, you're just second generation, from someone who was in the Depression? It remembers the Depression. A few of you, yeah. My grandfather, I have to go 2 generations back, but I've heard my story talk about I've heard him talk about being in the Depression and what that was like. Jerry, who comes here and does our spring revival, I've sat and listened to Yana talk about her grandmother, who lived through both forced famines in Ukraine. They weren't natural famines. They didn't have drought and they couldn't grow. The ruling class, which is what communism, socialism, Marxism, they're all cousins. They came down and they took all the food out of Ukraine to feed the ruling class because they couldn't grow food. They were having trouble growing it up in Moscow and those areas. And so they came and they got all the food and they literally created forced famines that those people had to live through. And I've heard Yana's grandmother talk about how she remembers when her best friends weren't there one day. And then she realized they weren't there because her parents were starving and they needed something to eat. That was happening in 586 BC. You can read the stories. Parents were literally killing their children so they could eat. And then once the walls were breached, the Babylonian soldiers came into the city. They brutalized the men, beat them mercilessly, killed them, raped the women, took the children. I mean, it was brutal. It makes what happened on October 7th seem kind of mild. And that was horrible. And the ones that somehow survived got carted off into slavery to another place. But right in the middle of this short 5-chapter book, in the midst of probably the most horrific thing that Jeremiah had ever seen, he writes these words in chapter 3, verse 22. The faithful love of the Lord never ends. Now you talk about patience. You talk about being patient, standing firm, and trusting God. I can't even imagine to be in that place and write those words. The faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies begin afresh each morning. His mercies are new every morning. His mercies are new every morning. It's like Jeremiah said, I look out the window and today is horrific. It's horrible. But here's what I know. God is faithful. His love is unending. His mercies are new every morning. I may not see them today, but I am going to choose to be patient because tomorrow's a new day and his mercies are new every morning. And tomorrow, if things are bad, I'm going to be patient. You know why? Because tomorrow is a new day and his mercies are new every morning. And you see him living with an attitude of patience, with a stand firm, set his heart towards God with the action of patience, understanding that there will be an end to this. God has promised. He knew the promises of God. He knew the promises of God. Although they're not found in Lamentations, in Jeremiah's book by that title, he's the one that said, I know the plans I have for you, and they are for a hope and a future, for good and not evil. So Jeremiah is holding on to the promises of God, and he's saying, God is faithful. His mercies are new every morning. He didn't grumble and complain. He lamented. He cried out. It's okay. He said, this is terrible, God. But your mercies are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. So be patient. Stand firm. Jesus is coming. Don't grumble or try to leverage your way and get your will over others. But understand that you are not alone in your struggles. You are in good company if you are facing hard times because of your faith in Christ. And realize that patience does have a reward. And that's eternal life with Jesus and all that he has for you. Be patient. Stand firm. Jesus is coming. Be patient. Stand firm. Jesus is coming. I struggled trying to find which one of these verses, which one of these directions. And I landed on verse 8. Because if you can get nothing else today, if you get nothing else, if you can grab that, well, I'd like you to check the box so Victor will send you an email and just say, hey, have you worked on verse 8 yet? But let me tell you how easy it would be. Verse 8, be patient and stand firm. Because Jesus is coming soon. So when you run into stuff tomorrow and you're having a hard day because you're missing that loved one that shouldn't be gone already, that still should be here, be patient. Stand firm. Jesus is coming soon. Maybe it's not that tragic. Maybe you get that score back on a test and it isn't what you thought it was going to be. And it's like, oh, what in the world? I thought I did better than that. Can I tell you, even in those moments, God is not partial. You don't have to have extreme tragedy. Anything that bothers you bothers him. And let me just tell you, tomorrow when that happens, be patient and stand firm. Jesus is coming soon. When you look and you can't see an end, and the light you do see at the end of the tunnel, you realize is the headlight of an oncoming train. Can I tell you? Be patient. Stand firm. Jesus is coming soon. It is my hope for you that will just ring in your ears all week long. That will become, I'll almost use one of those wonderful, yummy, New Age words that Victor loves. But the word in and of itself isn't bad. Let it become your mantra. Be patient. Stand firm. Jesus is coming soon. I know for a fact when I leave here, because Nathan is up in some godforsaken mountain trying to hunt something that I don't want to eat, but he does. So he's doing that. And so since my car's still out of commission, and Mackenzie's sick today, and so I got told, you're taking Nathan's car to church. Which means I have to try to fold my frame up into that little, whatever. And when I got in it this morning, he was gracious. He left me his car, left me his keys, and 13 miles to empty. So I know for a fact when I leave here today, I'm headed into Charlottesville to go get gas. I can get to Charlottesville in 13 miles, and I will get gas in Charlottesville. So I know I have to drive into Charlottesville. Can I tell you what I'm going to be saying all the way into Charlottesville? Because it's a Sunday, and I'm just telling you, I'm just based on previous Sundays driving into Charlottesville. Guess what I'm going to say about 20 times today? Be patient and stand firm, because Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming. And I pray that God will let me not only say that, but believe it and live with such an urgency that instead of judging others, criticizing others, grumbling about others, that it turns into a prayer for others. That urgency kicks into something in me and I say, God, yeah, they're messing with my time frame right now, but God, somehow let them meet you because you're coming soon. God, somehow let them know you. And can I tell you what this world would be just right here? When I say this world, this little part of our world, this little Tri-County area of our world, can you imagine the difference it would make if every one of you, instead of walking out of here and judging somebody out of impatience and criticizing somebody and grumbling about somebody and complaining about situations and circumstances that are really outside of your control, if you would turn that grumble and complaint into a prayer for their very souls and treat them like they're somebody that Jesus died for. Because guess what? They are. If you live like that, with that kind of urgency, when you go to work and you've got that boss that you're like, oh. Or maybe you don't work anymore, but you're going to go home and he's living there. Or maybe you got that employee because you are the boss. Excuse me. So glad that got caught online. That's good. It'll be recorded for posterity. I was getting ready to make a smart remark about your mother, Zoe, and I think the Holy Spirit just said, nope. Excuse me. Whew. Okay. I won't say it out loud because I feel condemned and judged already, but you know, it was about bosses and employees. Just, you can do the math. But when you run into whatever that is, be patient, stand firm. Jesus is coming soon, and he's coming back. And it's more than likely that one or both of you need to know him. So be patient, stand firm, because Jesus is coming soon. So let me close with this. Be patient and stand firm, because Jesus is coming soon. And before we leave, I just need to know that you know this. Be patient and stand firm, because Jesus is coming soon. Every one of you ought to check that box today because you've got it memorized. And if you don't, you just weren't paying attention. Because James 5 and 8 says what? Pop quiz.
Be patient and stand firm because Jesus is coming soon.
Very good, girls. I'm not going to do it. I know you guys are smart enough you can do it if you wanted to. Pray with me, please. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the way that it stretches us, that it reveals who you are to us, reveals your character. Lord, how it reveals the way we are to live. Lord, help us today to take all of these things that we've been hearing and listening to and that the Spirit has revealed in us and to us in the last 5-6 weeks. Whether it be ideas about joy or faith or freedom, wisdom or humility, or even patience. Help us to live out what we've heard today. Help us not to be just hearers of the word. Help us to put it into practice. Lord, I pray for those today that, whether it's the first time or maybe the 1,000th time, would somehow today make a commitment to you and say, God, regardless of where I have been or what I have done in the past or where it's been, today I choose you. I need you in my life. Because all of the rules of life make no sense without you. There is no joy without you. There is no faith without you. There is no freedom without you. There is no wisdom without you, and there is no humility, not true humility, without a total and complete surrender to who you are. And God, we need patience in our lives. So I pray for those today that are making that commitment, making that expression of faith to say, I choose you. Forgive me, God, of my sin. Forgive me of whatever has been in the past. And today I choose to turn and face and go after you. And stop trying to avoid any of those other things and chase my own direction. But I choose you today. Come and be with me. Be in relationship with me. Be the Lord, the supreme authority, the owner, the one in charge of my life. And I choose today to put my trust in you. Lord, everyone who calls you Lord, that calls you as Savior, that has made that confession of faith, whether right now or years ago, Lord, I pray that you will help us to walk out that faith. Walk out that faith so that it affects every part of our lives. Help us specifically, God, today to walk in patience, trusting you, standing firm, setting our heart towards you in a way that says, I will not give up, I will not quit, I will not stop, I will continue to go after you. Like the prophets of old, I will speak your name, I will speak your word, I will speak the gospel to everyone I can, through my life, through my actions, and through my words. Help me to be patient and trust in you, because you are coming soon. Help us to live with that urgency. Help us to live with that sense that it could be any moment, so that we live a life that is fruitful, that is protected, that is supported by the very rules of life you have given us. We thank you, Father, for these things. We give you praise.